evening, everyone. My name is Alex Elliott. I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you tonight to Richard Tarnas on the Planets in 2022. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS Public Programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Before we get started tonight, I have a few things I want to go over. Firstly, we will be having a live Q&A after the talk tonight. So please submit your questions at any time using our web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. We're going to pull questions that have been submitted on that form after the talk, and we will try to get through as many as we can. Before we get started, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Richard Tarnas. Richard Tarnas is the founding director of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program here at CIIS. He was formerly the director of programs and education at Esalen Institute and is the author of The Passion of the Western Mind, a history of the Western worldview from the ancient Greek to the postmodern, widely used in universities. His subsequent book, Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview, received the Book of the Year prize from the Scientific and Medical Network and is the basis for the upcoming documentary series, Changing of the Gods. He's a past president of the International Transpersonal Association and served for many years on the Board of Governors for the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. We're going to begin tonight's live streaming event with a special advanced screening of the opening episode of the new documentary series, The Changing of the Gods, followed by Richard's presentation and Q&A. This special screening is only available to those of you who are joining us live tonight, right now. So if you visit this event later, or you're watching this for the first time after that live stream, please refer to the information below this video to learn more about how to find and watch that episode.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm audible. And well, that's the first time I've seen all the credits, and what a collective effort on part of so many people. Welcome to our annual overview of the planetary situation, the archetypal state of the world that we try to discern around this time of the year. While a little bit older, especially during these kinds of years, it seems like the Chronos has been particularly potent. Let's just say that. So that was Changing of the Gods, the first episode. The meaning, of course, of the gods, the changing of the gods, it has to do with that great passage from Jung that he wrote in 1956 in The Undiscovered Self, when he described this overall time of history that we're in as a time of such radical transformation of death and rebirth, destruction and creation happening at such a profound level that he said it is the kairos, the right moment, the Greek word kairos, the right moment for a changing of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. And that's basically the gods have to do with that deep kind of archetypal shift that can happen in a civilization, in a culture, that shifts one epoch to another as a result of really the very foundations and assumptions and principles and dominant symbols that shape our consciousness and that help us navigate in life and give us a sense of orientation, all those go through some fundamental change, usually as a result of a crisis, which of course there are a few little signs of that in our time. I want to just say a brief word about the episode that many of you just saw, and that others who are watching this as a recording later can see separately. Changing of the Gods it's based on Cosmos and Psyche, where I traced a number of the most important planetary cycles and the correlated archetypal patterns in history, and I tracked these quite carefully through history over many centuries. But this series, a 10-part documentary series, Changing of the Gods, focuses on one important cycle, the Uranus-Pluto cycle, and particularly the alignment that we have just undergone, and we're still in the kind of overflowing wave form in our time. Although I've been doing this research pretty steadily for, since the 1970s, so almost half a century now, I'd finally gotten around to writing Cosmos and Psyche about 20 years ago, basically 2001 to 2004. And so all the writing was done that went into the book was done before this recent Uranus-Pluto square alignment emerged. It began a few years later, around 2007. I mean, when we have something like 2007 to 2020, I mean, it's a waveform. It's coming in. I mean, in the same way that there is a shift in the light before dawn, and then at dawn, and then after dawn, same thing at sunset. It's got that kind of gradations, and it's not an on and off, again, light switch, and you can't measure it right down to the to a specific day or year or month. But I did a lot of kind of meticulous research tracking when things happen, what month they happened, even what day, that bore the archetypal signature of that particular alignment. It was pretty clear that the conjunctions and oppositions of the outer planets, those correlations tend to occupy a good 15-degree orb, for example, the 1960 to 72 period. And the square's a little closer to 10 degrees. And that's in this case, this 2007 to 2020 was the approximate curve of that. But the pattern of the reason I'm bringing this up right now is that because I had finished the book prior to the film coming out, way prior to the film coming out, but prior to the transit, the next world transit of Uranus square Pluto, what I could do in my book was basically say, well, here's what happened in the past historical correlations with that particular cycle. And these are the ones that are so vivid at each point that they come in, that those planets come into certain quadrature alignments, conjunction, opposition, the two squares like that, that I felt it would be worthwhile to set out the major themes that I saw from those alignments that we might see playing out in the next transit that will be upcoming, and basically we would then see how the upcoming years, which we have now just passed, might resemble the what happened during the 1960s conjunction, for example, or what resemblances might be to the previous square, which was the 1930s. And you could, in retrospect, now see that what we just have gone through over this last decade and slightly more is a kind of very interesting creative combination of the 1960s and the 1930s. Plus, there's all the other great revolutionary and emancipatory epochs that also happen to coincide with Uranus-Pluto alignments that I traced in Cosmos and Psyche. And those, the big themes that I kind of pulled out and then described were the social and political revolutions, women's suffrage and feminist liberation movements, abolitionism and civil rights, racial justice movements. Another big theme was like technological revolutions and advances, the major scientific paradigm shifts and breakthroughs, sexual revolutions affecting everything from the literature and the arts of a period and the fashions to the social mores and so forth. The rise of psychedelic exploration and research, and the signs of an ongoing, well, the signs really of an emerging worldview across many scholarly disciplines and fields of activity. Those are the things that we would tend to see over and over again during these periods. It's not that these things never happened in between those periods, but during these alignments, there is a very clear intensification of those particular motifs within human history across many cultures and across many disciplines, many fields of human activity. Things just seem to come to a boil as the, but reflecting that particular, whatever particular archetypal complex is relevant. In this case, it's to the Uranus-Pluto combination. So Changing of the Gods is the brainchild of Kenny Ausable, who's the co-founder of Bioneers. And that began production about 8-9 years ago. It was originally planned as a single feature-length documentary, but as the team of really remarkable filmmakers that Kenny gathered around him, as they worked on it, and about, by the way, that team includes our own Maximilian Diarman and Theo Badashi from our PCC program, alums from that program, and there was just actually quite a contribution. In many ways, I suppose this is a kind of Bioneers CIIS PCC kind of collaboration. But the decision was eventually made to kind of expand the project to include 10 separate 30-minute episodes, each of which is devoted to one of those big historical cultural themes that I described, you know, political social revolutions, scientific breakthroughs, women's rights, liberation movements, the civil rights movements and abolitionism, et cetera. Because I had set these out before the decade began, the film ended up being a kind of living, ongoing test of the hypothesis as to whether the historical patterns bearing these archetypal features would indeed bear out during this period. And of course, you know, whether it was the election of a Black president to the United States for the first time, or the Black Lives Matter, or the Me Too movement, or all the other categories, the legalization of gay marriage, the rise in awareness of trans and the rights and dignity of trans people, the legalization of marijuana and the resurgence of psychedelic research after all these years since the 60s, et cetera. So it kind of, the whole period just became this kind of really interesting exploration to do the film on, and in this case, to do all the documentary episodes. So those of you who want to see either this episode again or want to see the other 9 episodes for free during this particular launch period, you can do so 1 episode per day, starting next Tuesday, which is February 22nd. That's 2/22/22, easy to remember. And each day there's an accompanying interview with various prominent astrologers, 1 per day. My one caveat about this is that the current distributor's promotional style and strategy with daily emails, once you sign up, with daily emails that carry a kind of sales rhetoric that's perhaps not exactly aimed at the CIS level of audience. It's quite a different spirit and approach than either in my books or my lectures, etc. But this seems to be the way of the world in film distribution these days. So if you'd like to see each episode for free, 1 a day starting next Tuesday, you can sign up for doing so. Just go to the changingofthegods.com website. So that's changingofthegods.com website. And on Monday, you'll receive, I think it's Monday, maybe Sunday, you'll receive an email that gives you instructions for how to tune into each episode, I think connecting you to the distributor. And then, the kind of have to tolerate the emails and the kind of sensationalist style of marketing, but the opportunity to see all the episodes is for free right now, is there. It just has that as the price of admission. And of course, there will be other opportunities down the road, which are still being worked out for seeing the film, but this is what's available at the moment. Okay, now to the planetary situation in 2022. I imagine I'm basically speaking to 3 different audiences here. On the one hand, one group's like the astrologically initiated and perhaps even quite learned. And then a second group would be astrologically interested, and who may also have a good depth psychological knowledge and symbolic sense. And then the third group is no doubt like astrologically uninterested, and perhaps might be even unpsychological, but is nevertheless looking for any clues at all about what the hell is going on with our country or the world going to hell in a handbasket, or however else they might frame our situation, which is pretty clearly critical. So as an overview, just to begin with, those of you who saw the episode, and those of you who've seen my last 2, or either one of my last 2 kind of archetypal state of the world reports on the world transits that I've done in 2020, 2021, you'll be familiar with the fact that I, the basic nature of the Uranus-Pluto, huge alignment and archetypal energy that's been, more or less, the energy's really been shaping the zeitgeist so potently for this last decade and a half. But then what happened was that towards the end of it, around 2018, Saturn got into the picture, and it conjoined Pluto, and that's no joke. And then it squared Uranus right after that, or actually overlapping with it. So they all overlapped. They're all kind of constellated together. You could really feel the action, like say a year ago, last January, like January 6th, really kind of carried all the forces at once into a concrescence, to use Whitehead's term, of a powerful event. So the end of this last decade and the start of the one we're in now because of Saturn joining the Uranus-Pluto energy, it sustained that energy longer. It shifted it in important ways, kind of Saturnian ways, and it made it all the more a sharply, like a conflict of sharply opposing forces. Lyle, I wonder if you could just put up the first slide here, and we could, it would be helpful for us to be able to look at that okay, it looks like you've got it up there. I'm seeing a different image, but now I see it up there. Okay, so what you see there is those are like the bell curves of the, that kind of overall archetypal waveform that's coming into history, into the collective psyche, kind of shaping motivations, shaping our perceptions, helping to constellate a kind of energy and the kinds of events that we care that typically reflect that archetypal energy. And you can see that it is pretty widely. I wonder if I can open that up more so that I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just bring it up here so I can see it on my big screen and have a slightly more clear. There we go. Yeah, so you can see it begins back there at 2007, and it comes all the way there into just past 2020. So that's when the entire transit is within 10 degrees orb. But notice how towards the end of it, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction comes in with its own, shorter, more kind of condensed curve. And then right after, overlapping with that as well, the Saturn square Uranus. So all these are happening at once, at one point. But one thing to keep in mind is that this wave that, let's take the big one, that as it kind of is descending there and is joined by the other two, something I've emphasized in the past as in speaking with you is how when we're talking about world transits, the archetypal forces that are set in motion during that overall period, they take root in this community, and that they initiate movement of different kinds. The films are made, books are written, music is composed and heard and performed, and initiatives are begun, and then they don't just stop when the Uranus square Pluto has reached a certain number of degrees past exact. So much has been set in motion that there's a kind of momentum, so that the later part of a world transit like this, even though there's a declining curve in terms of the astronomical situation, archetypally, this really kind of keeps extending, as those of you who may remember the 60s and how much that energy went into the 70s. Early 70s were very much coherent with, and a continuation of, and at times even an intensification of what happened. And that's why like the second half of a decade like that is often more potently reflective of that complex than the first half, because so much more and more is getting set in motion. Okay, so the next, let's see, could we just look at the next slide as well, Lyle, for a second? And there you will see, this is, if we were to track more carefully all the exact, the planets are all moving around the sun, as is the Earth, and the results of those complex combinations of movements and orbits means that there is a retrograde direct movement and from the point of view of the Earth, and these planets will come closer and then farther away, and then closer and then farther away to the exact alignment. And that's what you see with this more detailed tracking of the planetary cycles distances. But for our purposes, it's actually much more accurately reflective of the big picture, even though there are these kinds of ups and downs, waves, things come in a crescendo and then diminish. But overall, and let's go back to the main, the first one that we were looking at, Lyle. Overall, these are quite, they're more helpful in getting a sense for the whole, because there is so much more continuity, more momentum, and it's really from the first time that a transit it comes into orb till it's the last time that it comes within orb. It tends to be quite active. Okay, so we're done with the slides now, but I just wanted to give you a sense visually of that overall tracking of the major. Those are the biggest three. We'll talk about a couple other things tonight as well, but those are really huge. And I think you've got enough of the Uranus-Pluto under your belt that we don't need to say much more about that. But with Saturn coming onto that alignment, and then one by one really coming in on Pluto, I mean, the whole pandemic deeply reflected that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. All the sense of, well, the collective encounter with mortality, the enormous crisis. So many people are saying we haven't had anything like this since 9/11. Well, that was the last time Saturn and Pluto were in an axial alignment, the opposition, and this was a conjunction. And then you also have the just generally speaking, when Saturn hits Pluto, or in this case, both of them, it's kind of like when the rubber hits the road, the screws tighten, the pressures increase, the reality principle asserts itself extremely potently. That's the Plutonic, and in unpredictable ways and erratically, and that's the Uranian influence. And the accelerating tensions tend to reach a crisis point. So as I talk about these different current alignments, I'm going to try to address both the collective level and how these same world transit alignments can be felt in our individual lives and inner experience as well. Because that's we all participate in the world soul, the anima mundi, world soul of the world, the collective psyche in Jung's terms. But the beauty of turning the collective psyche or the collective unconscious into recognizing that it's really the anima mundi is, one, it helps us recognize that just because it or part of it might be unconscious to us doesn't mean it's unconscious, period. But also it helps us recognize that our deep psyche is actually the deep psyche of the cosmos. It's not just we're not in our isolated brain corners as individuals, nor even as a species. We are embedded in a collective psyche that could be seen as like the species mind or the Homo sapiens collective psyche, but that ultimately is embedded in deeper and larger fields of consciousness and agency and identity that includes the whole Earth community and ultimately like the solar system and the galaxy and the cosmos itself, and people who do deep explorations, whether it's through psychedelics or through deep meditation, or sometimes it can come in and just an epiphany out of the blue while you're walking through the woods or washing dishes. the people who do have those encounters with their own really deep dimensions of their psyche tune into the fact that that in a certain way, all of the cosmos is in each of us, as well as each of us being in all of the cosmos. It's a very mysterious relationship. So a couple of last, I think, crucial points. I kind of made them I think these were included in the interviews that were done with me in the film, which was recorded. I think my parts were mostly recorded about 7 years ago, 2015 or so. But again, basic principles. This is not mechanistic causation. It's not like linear, efficient causes coming from the planets like electromagnetic radiation, et cetera, gravity, that's causing things to be this way in a certain way. It doesn't seem to work that way. It's more synchronistic. It's more a synchronous correlation that is meaningful through and through. Meaning is what is cohering it. Jung's the person, of course, who grasped or coined that term for something that had been observed for millennia. I mean, indigenous cultures totally live in a synchronistic universe. You only need the concept of synchronicity for a modern mind to be able to start grappling with what most of humanity's actually lived in all along. But discernment is important. You can always be projecting things, and that's where discernment. So it's a real I-thou relationship with the world around you and the events, and not just a projecting of what your needs are or your skepticism or whatever. But there's an openness to the meaning being communicated. So it's synchronicity, it's everything breathing together rather than mechanistic causality. And then the archetypes that are the fundamental principles that we're studying here, they really need to be seen as multivalent. They have a range of ways of manifesting while being faithful to themselves. That includes light and shadow and everything in between, noble and ignoble, trivial and profound, and so forth. And that's where human agency comes in, and that's where we have a responsibility to play our role in the whole. We are the cosmos who has been given a kind of, which has evolved through us to reach a certain form of consciousness that happens to have an awareness of the planets and the correlations with these archetypal principles, and who happen to have this kind of gift of being able to be more conscious of what would be otherwise unconscious, in which case we'd be more puppets of those energies. And now we can be kind of tracking them, being a little more aware of more life-enhancing versus more destructive ways of living out these energies. So we're always going for participation here, for more co-creativity, a greater level of discernment and conscious awareness and self-discernment, and bringing a moral attitude towards our engagement with these forces. And then these great archetypal patterns seem to synchronically manifest across many individuals and cultures at the same time during these world transits. But they are also diachronic through history. Each time the alignments come into, each time those cycles come into alignment. And then finally, there's a kind of cumulative evolutionary quality to the whole picture. It's not just a repetitive cycle. Novelty, human agency, and who knows what other invisible factors are at work that shape and evolve the manifestation of these energies. Okay, so let's say a few things now about the Saturn square Uranus. It's totally kind of dominating the show these days. Very much, you can't read a headline today without recognizing how much it's present. The Uranus principle, of course, is related to the unexpected, the trickster energy, the rebellious energy. It wants freedom. It is pushing towards the new, the future. It's connected often with youth as well, innovation, originality, but also kind of highly unpredictable, resistant to restraint or order, etc. While Saturn is just the opposite. It's order. It's constraint. It's structure. It's inhibition. It's the weight of the past. It's the foundations that allow us to get to this point. It's our backbone. It's our sense of gravitas. It's what we learn over many years of experience, etc. But it also can be oppressive. It can be stuck in resistance and so forth. And so you bring these two together, and it's a highly unstable combination. There's a tendency to build up pressures between the forces for change and the forces for resistance, of resistance to change. And that, should I bring that down here? Huh. A couple of things I didn't bring here, but that's okay. I'll do it by memory. There's a tendency for this to kind of build up, like within a closed system, the tension of the pressures for change and the resistance to change, or the enduring power of the foundational structures that are already in place in the status quo. Those can be equally active, kind of poised vis-a-vis each other in such a way that it builds up to a crisis point. And then there tends to be either a collapse, a breakdown, an accident, a split, a schism, a separation, a divorce, a civil uprising, dissidence, divisiveness, tensions between groups, between conservative and progressive, between right and left, but also within each of these too. There'll be these divisions, these kind of powerful schismatic impulses, the circular firing squads, as they call them, that are, as they're called in the Republican Party now, where the more radically right are out to get the traditional Republicans, or in the Democratic Party, the more whether you want to call them radical or the more progressive versus the more moderately liberal within the Democratic Party, being in real combat with each other at times. Or it's the divorce from within the family, between marital, but also can be professional. Think of Freud and Jung, for example, who separated, had their divorce, as it were, breaking under their Saturn-Uranus transit, which went right across their sun and moon connection. I mean, it was, Jung was viewed by Freud as his crown prince, and then this great disappointment when Jung, who had Saturn-Uranus himself and went through his own kind of breakthrough, and resistance to the Freudian dogma. And so there was this great divorce, which in some ways is a still significant divorce in the field of depth psychology and psychotherapy, between the Freudian psychoanalysts and Jungian analysts and archetypal psychologists, et cetera. Though many bridges are being made these days, including somebody like Stan Groff, who really did a brilliant job of integrating the overall Freudian and Jungian perspectives and much more. And that's also the idea of the bridges that are being made between the opposing forces. That's a good, it's the same thing like with infrastructure. Saturn Uranus is so dealing with infrastructure. Engineers often have Saturn Uranus. It's this combination of practical, pragmatic, material structures and inventiveness and coming up with solutions and safety measures and so forth. And when Saturn Uranus periods come up, there tends to be simultaneously lots of problematic events in that area, electrical grid breakdowns, power grids, power outages, bridges collapsing, and so forth. And there's a great push for infrastructure like rebuilding, retrofitting, repairing, and so forth. And that's totally what Saturn Uranus is about as well. You could say, I think of all the, let me go through some of the major themes of Saturn Uranus. You could say, just generally speaking, the whole idea of crisis and crisis management. Those are key themes for Saturn Uranus. Crises tend to happen. They tend to come unexpectedly, like seems like the pandemic is declining and then Omicron comes on, or then this kind of the great instability of life today, not knowing not only about the pandemic, but also about, there's all sorts of disruptions. It's disruptions of the supply chain. It's also many people quitting jobs, the assertion of their freedom to, within the work realm, which is very Saturnian. Often it's a real tendency to make a break, the end of a way of being in some way. I think I might have talked about last time, people like, in terms of crisis and crisis management, like somebody like Sully Sullenberg, who's born with Saturn square Uranus, the early 50s version of it. And he had quite a potent version of it in his natal chart, Mercury on it. And he taught aviation safety and how to handle crises as a pilot. And then he had it happen to himself. And he's the one that safely landed the jet on the Hudson the couple days or so before back in 2009, just before Obama's first inauguration. That's a perfect example of a well integrated, well lived Saturn Uranus, because Saturn Uranus was both in his birth chart and it was happening at that point. It was a Saturn opposite Uranus in the sky. That was the last world transit of Saturn Uranus. Think of somebody like Churchill, who also had it. Saturn Uranus often brings mistakes. People make there's a lot of errors. Errors just happen because of technical breakdowns. The internet stops, knock on wood, tonight. The people having difficulties with Zoom or whatever platform, the computer crashes, or it could be, many other things like that tend to happen. But there's also a tendency to make mistakes in judgment. It has to do with like Saturn being like, here's the structure, and then the trickster comes in, a disruption happens. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. And then the Saturnian quality comes in again as you're going to have to pay for that. That's going to, there's a price for that. It's got consequences. Saturn brings consequences for your actions. It is the archetype of problem, the archetypal principle of the problematic dimension of life, which the Uranian, when it's connecting to Saturn, brings in through its unpredictable events. But I bring up Churchill because he made great mistakes, but he also was a great crisis manager through World War II. Biden, who's born with the conjunction, he's running for president, and he says a couple of years ago, he says, we're going to manage the hell out of this crisis. That's such a Saturn-Uranus attitude. It's such a good example, actually, of all the political rhetoric he could draw on. He would express his own Saturn-Uranus conjunction. And that's because archetypal complexes put unconscious pressures on metaphor selection that we spontaneously use, or on word selection, or on policy preferences, and so forth. A big element in Saturn and Uranus is between the past and the future, but also the old and the young, different generations. There can be generational conflicts. And it's not just, and it's often not something that is pushed by the generations against each other, though that can easily happen. But it also can be something that happens kind of by virtue of circumstances beyond everybody's control, like the fact that the effort to preserve the life of older people during the pandemic meant that much younger people had to suppress their activities more than they might have had to otherwise, because they could bring home the virus to their grandparents or somebody who's has immune vulnerabilities, and et cetera. And then right now, it's time to let children go back to school without masks and et cetera, and play. And so you can just see how there's that kind of conflict. But it's also been very potent during these last 3 years, looking at it between generations, where older generations are holding on to the jobs while the younger are unemployed. That can be an issue. It can take many forms. It can also take the form of even generations that are, for example, much younger than mine. Like I'm a baby boomer, and I've talked to millennials who are describing both the cultural interests and also social media choices and styles as being beyond them. It's like I think there's almost an acceleration of generational change, partly technologically mediated. Anyway, so this can happen in many ways. But the whole idea with all these is to help bring about some kind of a integration of Saturn and Uranus, so that there's more of a quality of, this is what the dialectical synthesis is all about. Hegel was born with Saturn, Uranus, and that's what it's all about. Jung was born with it, the opposition, and he's all about like holding the tension of opposites, be faithful to both sides, and then if you can sustain that tension with a profound enough engagement, you can also be able to be the place within which an unexpected integration takes place. The divine third unpacks, emerges of its own accord. The sacred marriage of the opposites, the complexio oppositorum, the conjunctio oppositorum, the conjunction of opposites takes place And you can't, it's a live birth. You can't predict exactly how that might happen, but we can work towards it. Okay, I'm running out of time here before I want to give some time to questions and answers. Let me just say a couple words about the, yeah, I probably got enough here to talk about without the episode, but I'm glad but I'm glad you all got to see the episode. It's well worth it, and it communicates a lot. We're all going, the United States is going through its Pluto return. As a matter of fact, it reaches exact alignment this next week. But it's with any of these big returns, that means Pluto's coming back to where it was in 1776. You don't see this ever happen in an individual's life because Pluto has such a big cycle. But you do see Pluto transits in individual lives, and we have a very good sense for what that's about. And we can see that all the major qualities that the Pluto return has already activated in the U.S. We can see it vividly already. Because of the U.S.'s outsized influence in the world, its morphic field disseminates so readily into the zeitgeist of the larger world. And the larger world already had its plutonic potential fully activated from the Uranus-Pluto square it's been going through the past decade and a half. But this overall period, just looking at our own U.S. situation and what we're deep in the center of right now, and is being worked out. I mean, we're in a crucible underworld of transformation, and the social political universe kind of is imbued with this plutonic energy. I've spoken of like Hades swallowing up Persephone, the soul of America, as it were, during the Uranus-Pluto square in the last few years of the political administration that was in charge. But also, I really want to emphasize, so important, the flushing to the surface of the demons, of the poisons, of the shadow, of the collective, our national shadow, and the repressed and concealed depths that can only be confronted and addressed and possibly transformed if they are brought to the consciousness of the nation. And we've been doing that big time for these last few years. But we have to recognize that we inevitably are going to be seeing, and already are seeing, really a lot of plutonic themes, like the decay and destruction of existing conditions and beliefs and structures that requires a really deep transformation and renewal of life. Above all, on the level of our Earth community, ecological justice, social justice, biodiversity, and just kind of waking up to the fact that we are participants in a larger communion of biospiritual subjects in our Earth community. But in the meantime, Pluto, typically we see like power struggles with dominating individuals or institutions, clashes of will, autocracy, tyrants, encounter with destructive forces, either inside us or outside us. Also inside the nation, as well as outside the nation, or geopolitical. There's an unconscious attraction towards dangerous situations or environments that are marked by life and death urgency. And encountering the violent forces of nature, storms, fires, thunder and lightning, volcanoes, earthquakes, all plutonic. But the other side of it is, a great potential for tremendous transformation, strengthening of the will, personal renewal, sense of one's life being moved and transformed by deep evolutionary energies that are coming through us, in the same way that a mother feels when they are giving birth. And in some ways, yes, they're giving birth and they're bringing their all into it, but there's also like something bigger is coming through them. It's like nature itself, Mother Nature, the everything is just moving to bring about this, and one is participating in it, bringing one's all, and at the same time feeling it come through one as something in some ways, in some sense, distinct from or encompassing ourselves. And that's what we're, I think, all involved in. We're all participating in an enormous transformational moment and crucible. I'm just going to mention that there's a, before I go to the Q&A, that there is a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that's just coming into orb right now. And it's an extreme, and that will go for the rest of this year. Basically, it'll be most tight during the next few months over the spring, early summer, but it really will be coming back into and more or less staying within orb this entire year, right into January next year. That Jupiter-Neptune energy, it's a very, it's idealistic. It tends to expand the imagination. It tends to bring a greater faith in life, more hopefulness, tendency to trust life's generosity. There can be greater humanitarian impulses, more joyful altruism. There can also be an urge to enter into one's imaginative life more fully. There can be more mystical experiences, feeling at one with the universe. That's getting into things like film, theater, music, those kinds of Neptunian transcendent kinds of expressions of the imagination that can elevate us. At the same time, there's a tendency with Jupiter, Neptune, all have their shadows. There could be unrealistic optimism. There can be misguided idealism, gullibility, naivete. There could be misplaced sympathy or sentimentality. There could be sometimes overly concerned with celebrity and celebrity image, and kind of bedazzled by media and advertising images of success and happiness and that kind of thing. Or there can be this tendency towards a kind of spiritual bypass in which we are trying to always see everything in such a positive light, and we ascribe all events to benevolent intentions, and overlook significant differences that we should be attending to, all to serve this kind of mythic ideal or unity, sense of unity. So we have to use discernment. Okay, I am going to go to my questions now that I think my team over there at CIS is going to show me or share with me. Is anybody going to? I don't have anything right now.
If you click on that button that says Q&A at the bottom of your screen.
Oh, right. Thank you very much.
You'll see them in there.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. This is from Maurice Trout. Since humans have a tendency to remember the negative experiences and dwell on fearful scenarios, how can the upcoming planetary constellations help us encourage each other to traverse the pain and move through what is difficult, rather than let it paralyze us and shut us down? Yeah, and just like how do we deal with the traumas that we've all been through in one form or another, and many forms, and yet not let those paralyze us, or not let those become so obsessive in our ongoing reality that we fail to connect to a greater trust in life. Well, one thing I think is to support each other, to be in community is very important. Another thing is to take time for yourself to connect with what is most nourishing, whether it's music that you particularly love, or walking by the sea, or in a woods that's particularly dear to you. Staying connected with those experiences can be very healing. The other thing is when people are in pain, or we're in pain, and the idea is indeed to move through it and not just say, well, you don't have to look at it that way or whatever, or to suppress it. It's the way through is, or the way past it is through. And this is where, I think of the most plutonic psychotherapist probably ever is Stan Grof, who's got, almost all the planets, inner and outer, are aspecting his natal, in his natal chart are aspecting Pluto. And he is kind of the master of being, trusting that process of the emergence of really difficult, traumatic memories and painful somatic and emotional places, and trusting that and going with it, encouraging it, because it's bringing it to consciousness. The full experience of it is the funeral pyre of it, as he said. And the more we can find that in ourselves, the being able to do that and connecting with the bigger cycle of death and rebirth, and realizing that state of no exit, of we're never going to get out of here, the state of hell, it's an archetypal gestalt that's quite convincing when you're in it, but it's not the whole story. It's part of a bigger process. It's moving towards birth. I like to say it's hell is a processive phenomenon. It's a reality, and as soon as you actually see that in some way, there's a liberation from it in part. But the more you connect with that in yourself, then you're in a position to be able to be with others through theirs, and that's huge. Much more could be said on all these questions are deep, but in the interest of moving through a few, I'll keep going. From Victoria, do the planets suggest a larger systemic shift like the death and rebirth of democracy or capitalism? A very transformed capitalism, let's hope. I think, or a radically transformed economic system for so many reasons is called for. We're moving into Uranus trine Pluto for the rest of the decade. And that's, I think, going to help. I qualify that statement because even though I firmly believe it will give us some really a better harmonious kind of influx of the Plutonic and Uranian energies in connection with each other in a way that is easier to handle. But everything depends on how we're handling the current hard aspects that we've been going through from Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. The consequences of the big decisions that are having to be made day by day right now in all of our lives and at the national and international level are just going to have consequences for years to come, and will certainly shape what's possible under these new alignments. But if you combine that Uranus trine Pluto that all of us will go through, the whole world, and the fact that the US is going through not only a Pluto return, but a Uranus return that will be quite tight by the later part of this decade. And that's because Uranus and Pluto are coming right back to where they were when the US was born in 1776. That really does suggest something like the death and rebirth of democracy, if it goes well, if it's a successful birth. The first Uranus return of the US was a civil war, and Lincoln declared it was like, this is new birth of freedom. It was like he rewrote the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. He and the many progressive blacks and whites of his time succeeded in bringing about a shift. We're still working on that shift, but it was just a huge event, and it could have gone another way. And that's why, but it was a new birth of freedom. That's the Uranus return. A new form of democracy emerged, and we're still seeking to bring a new form of democracy. God knows we need it. Let's all work towards that to emerge in this decade. Question from Erica: how do you suggest one deals with the anxiety while moving through a challenging transit? Deep breathing helps. Slow, deep breathing. Being in community, being in connection with others, sharing your anxiety and not bottling it up inside, but seeking assistance. Also, I think for those of you who are astrologically initiated and informed, and you know how to track your transits and your natal chart and the world transits, if you do the research, you can see that the people who've gone through, and in your own life, it's the hard aspect transits and in world transits, personal ones, as well as in our natal chart, that can have the most positive, fruitful results, even though they cause quite a bit of anxiety and tension, typically, as you're dealing with the opposing energies, or the, how did I put it? I was thinking about Saturn and Uranus square. It's like when they come into hard aspect, they square off against each other, and you have to deepen your consciousness and expand it in order to take in and make possible a synthesis. But if you do the studying, then you see, like, wow, this, just because I've got this transit coming doesn't mean it's the end of the world. This could actually signify an outcome that could come from these archetypal energies being worked through in me that will leave me deeply grateful about this time and what I've gone through and what I've done. And so if you track how that's happened in other people's lives whom you admire, then it teaches you to have a better recognition of, so you don't become phobic about transits, and you trust the larger wisdom. Just remember what an amazing phenomenon it is that the movements of the planets so exquisitely coincide with our experience, personal and collective, and with the archetypal forms and shaping of our experience collectively and individually. The fact that this is happening to all of us on this earth, and that each moment has these correlations going on, points to a level of intelligence and archetypal beauty at work in the cosmos that is in some very mysterious way focused on our moving earth. I love those images of the earth and the planets, moving through in a spiral around the sun as they're all moving through the galaxy. And yet somehow in our solar system, for those of us here on Earth, there seems to be a cosmic focusing of meaning on our planet, on every individual born here, and on every moment that we go through together and individually. It's as Stan Groff says, it shatters the rational mind's capacity to wrap our head around a cosmic being that could constellate such a grand orchestration. And it's suggests something of like an almost biblical sense of like, not a sparrow falls without thy knowledge. And that can give one a trust. It can give one a faith. It can give a sense that the universe is bathing us with love all the time. It's a care. And so I think we're in a very special position in our time, even as it's the most critical in some ways that humanity's ever faced, with the greatest responsibilities that we've ever faced for our role in the larger Earth community. At the same time, we are getting help. We are getting a kind of cosmic gift that it's an act of grace, and I hold it precious to in my own life, and I know that it is relevant to everyone's lives. I think it's. I just want to finish with a final thought here about how we can orient our lives in such a time, because I know we're at our limit here. Thanks to all of you who have listened to all this time. But I was trying to think of, in my own life and in others whom I know well, like what's and all the biographies I've read and so forth. How can we orient our lives in such a time that could and make decisions about how we can best contribute to the larger causes that are at stake right now? And if I could just put it in the most homely, everyday terms, I think first it's like find what you feel a certain competence at, and that you take a kind of creative joy in doing, but also that you see as being useful to others, that others find useful. And then give yourself to that, devote yourself, be faithful to the gift, cultivate it, hone it, discipline it, explore it and expand it, and work with others, work collaboratively, and hone it in community, because in isolation, you're only going to get so far. But if you've got a collaborative feedback and combination of supportiveness and honest, critical efforts towards ever better manifestations of what one is doing, it's going to be great. It's going to be much greater improvement than would happen on one's own. So, I mean, that's basically, I think of how to, choose how to live, day to day, and devote your life, and just find what you're competent at, what you feel the creative joy. That's a sign of the cosmos's joy coming through you, and its creativity coming through you. And that's your individuated form to attend to cultivate, to water it, and look at it each day and make sure that it's growing. But it needs to be useful to the community. It needs to be useful to others, to serves the whole, not just yourself. And then give yourself to that. Make it that's what turns the eternal child and its creativity into something that endures. Is you integrate the senex, the Saturn, with the puer aeternus, the puella eterna, the eternal child in us. You integrate that with the senex, with the wise, old, disciplined, experienced part of it, and you bring about that synthesis. And if you have children, be good parents. I mean, that's basically it. At least that's it for now. Okay, now we'll bring Alex back to say goodnight. And thank you for being with me again another year for our little annual overview of this state of the zeitgeist, and how we can best explore, and how we can best contribute to its positive unfolding in the future.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. Tonight's talk was recorded and it will be available to watch later, except for that opening episode of the new documentary series, The Changing of the Gods. This special screening was only available to those who joined us live. So if you revisit this event later, or you're watching this for the first time after that live stream, please refer to the information below this video to learn more about how to find and watch that episode. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us and have a wonderful evening.